He took off his shirt in front of the prison boss, and then reluctantly removed his pants. Because he wasn't wearing any underwear, the boss laughed at him, although the other inmates around them jeered and shouted. Without Malamadra's permission, no one dared to touch him. Malamadra gave him a nickname, Underwear Boy, teased him a little, and then allowed him to put his clothes back on. Malamadra always paid extra attention to the new prisoners, but neither of them realized just how wild things were about to get. A few hours earlier, Underwear Boy had started learning about the prison environment under the guidance of 2 guards. They taught him what prisoners had to hand over, the power structures of different gangs, and the common weapons used inside. In fact, Underwear Boy wasn't a real criminal, he was a new guard, and his name was Juan. It was his first day on the job, and he had to get familiar with the place. At that time, Malamadra was in a special area for exercise. Soon, time was up, and the guards asked Malamadra to return to his cell. Just as they were putting handcuffs on him, a sudden loud bang echoed through the prison. While the guards turned their heads to check the noise, Malamadra spit a key out of his mouth. A guard walked in and asked around, but, seeing nothing wrong, quickly turned back to watch Malamadra. At that moment, Malamadra caught him off guard and locked him in a chokehold. Earlier, the loud bang had been caused by a section of the corridor's ceiling collapsing. The falling debris landed right on top of Juan. It not only left him bleeding but also caused him to briefly lose consciousness. The 2 guards didn't think too much about it and quickly carried Juan to cell 211. Since there were no prisoners in that cell, they decided to let him rest there while one guard went to find a doctor. But before 2 minutes passed, the other guard ran back, shouting that a full-blown prison riot had broken out. All the prisoners had escaped their cells. To avoid being killed by the inmates, the 2 guards had no choice but to flee. They had to leave Juan behind. As Juan slipped deeper into unconsciousness, the prisoners outside went into a frenzy, smashing everything they could. Years of oppression had finally led to a rebellion. Led by Malamadra, the prison's original security forces dared not step back inside. Back in the surveillance room, a guard told the warden they needed to rescue Juan immediately. Before they could come up with a plan, a prisoner entered cell 211. He slapped Juan hard across the face, waking him up. The cell was supposed to be empty, so seeing someone inside was suspicious. When the prisoner questioned him, Juan looked completely dazed. Seeing that Juan stayed silent, the prisoner turned to leave and report to Malamadra. Juan slowly staggered to the doorway, listening to the sounds outside, and pieced together what was happening. A wave of despair crashed over him. The prisoners wouldn't care whether he was a guard or not. Falling into their hands meant getting beaten or worse. Juan quickly took off his shoelaces and tossed them into the toilet. Then he threw in his belt, his work ID, and his wallet. Just as he was about to remove his wedding ring, the same prisoner came back in. He forced Juan out of the room and all of it was caught by the surveillance cameras. Very soon, Juan was dragged before Malamadra. Juan had thrown away those items to disguise himself as a new inmate. Only then could he avoid getting beaten to death. Malamadra was a convicted murderer serving a 120-year sentence. That kind of record alone secured his position as the prison boss. Most prisoners still held on to hope of one day being released. Facing Malamadra's interrogation, Juan lied and said he had just been arrested for murder that very day. Malamadra didn't seem too suspicious. He only told Juan to strip naked, wanting to check if he was different. Seeing nothing wrong, Malamadra didn't waste any more time. He ordered his men to start destroying the surveillance cameras. After dressing up again, Juan followed the others into the main hall. Watching the prisoners wildly smashing things, Juan suggested they should leave at least one camera intact. Seeing Malamadra's puzzled look, Juan quickly explained, "Leave one camera so we can show the outside world what we want. That way, we can negotiate with them. When we don't need it, we can just cover it with a cloth." Malamadra thought about it and agreed it made sense. With the boss's approval, Juan hurried up to adjust the camera. In the surveillance room, the guards breathed a temporary sigh of relief. It was obvious Juan was signaling that he was blending in safely as one of the inmates. This gave the outside world hope that as long as Juan's cover wasn't blown, he wouldn't be in immediate danger, but the reality was far more dangerous. Malamadra led Juan into the restroom, where the same guard he had choked earlier was being held. This guard had a long history of bullying Malamadra's men, which is why Malamadra had made sure to keep him alive for now. Juan looked at him, not even daring to breathe too loudly, terrified the guard might recognize him as a fellow officer. The fear was unbearable. Luckily, the guard didn't recognize Juan and assumed he was just one of Malamadra's lackeys. Juan narrowly avoided disaster, but the guard wasn't so lucky. Malamadra's bald enforcer had been waiting with an iron rod in hand. Malamadra told the guard they wouldn't kill him. After saying that, he led Juan away, leaving behind only the guards' screams echoing in the hall. Outside the prison walls, the special forces had completely surrounded the facility. One order was all it would take to storm the place and crush the riot, but the guards explained they couldn't launch a direct assault yet because of the prisoners in Sector 4. There were 3 very special inmates there, members of a separatist movement from Spain's Basque region. It was fine to keep them imprisoned, but if any of them died during the chaos, it could trigger a major political disaster. Malamadra was clearly aware of their existence too. He had a few of his men bring the 3 separatists into the main hall. He ordered the cloth covering them to be removed, making sure the outside world could see them through the surviving surveillance camera. Malamadra understood perfectly that these 3 were priceless to the government. They couldn't afford to let them die. These men became the perfect hostages. Malamadra, facing a life sentence, didn't care about politics at all. He had no problem killing if it came down to it. He had murdered a guard 10 years ago without hesitation. The officials outside dared not take any risks. They had no choice but to consider negotiating and see what Malamadra truly wanted. Inside, Malamadra asked Juan to write down their list of demands. Most of the inmates couldn't read or write, but Juan's handwriting was neat and precise. It was hard to believe he was supposed to be a murderer. Juan explained that he had once worked at a post office, which was why he could write well. Since Malamadra was in a good mood, he didn't press him further. Their demands were actually quite simple: more family visits, no solitary confinement without cause, regular water supply, and basic humane treatment. In other words, they were simply asking to be treated like human beings. Previously, a cancer-stricken inmate had been locked in cell 211, ignored by the guards until he finally took his own life out of sheer agony. That incident was one of the many reasons the inmates hated the guards. After hearing these grievances, Juan's perception of Malamadra began to shift. He still didn't know exactly why Malamadra had killed before, but at least for now, Malamadra seemed to have a heart. As they chatted, Juan revealed that he had a wife at home and she was heavily pregnant. Hearing this, Malamadra's first reaction was sympathy. He pitied Juan, knowing he wouldn't be there to see his child born. While they were talking, the negotiator arrived. As Juan was being frisked, he secretly whispered to him that the 3 hostages were hidden in the laundry room. Then he calmly returned to stand beside Malamadra, facing the prison's most dangerous man. The negotiator was visibly tense. He feared he might never walk out alive, but Malamadra remained civil. He instructed Juan to hand over the paper listing their demands. After reading it, the negotiator said he needed to discuss the matter with his superiors before giving a response. He also asked to verify the hostages' safety. Malamadra flatly refused. The negotiator didn't dare press the issue further and agreed to Malamadra's terms for now. As he was about to leave, Malamadra suddenly called him back. He requested a phone so that Juan could call his pregnant wife and reassure her. This unexpected opportunity made Juan's heart race uncontrollably. After pretending for so long, he hadn't imagined Malamadra himself would hand him a chance to escape. The greater the hope, the deeper the despair. As they prepared for the call, shouting broke out somewhere in the prison. Malamadra, unsure of what was happening, ordered Juan to go check. Juan rushed over, only to discover that one of Malamadra's men had killed someone. The whole scene had been caught on the surviving camera. Special forces, after a quick assessment, assumed the dead man was one of the hostages. They immediately ordered an assault. Without hesitation, Juan sprinted to the laundry room, ignoring everyone's protests. He insisted on getting the hostages out. Outside, special forces were already preparing to descend from the roof. If they stormed in, the panicked prisoners would likely kill the hostages. As a guard who still cared, Juan was thinking about preventing a national crisis. He led the 3 hostages out and placed them right in front of the surveillance camera. Seeing that the hostages were alive, the commanding officer immediately called off the assault. Hearing the cancellation order, Malamadra breathed a deep sigh of relief. The prisoners inside erupted in cheers, and Juan was hailed as a hero. When Malamadra returned, Juan wisely lifted Malamadra's arm in the air, as if celebrating a shared victory. The crowd lifted both of them onto their shoulders. Malamadra smiled, but inside, he was burning with anger. Once the commotion settled down, the negotiator was allowed to leave. However, outside, the news was already blowing up the story of the prison riot. Juan's wife, drinking coffee at a restaurant, saw the news report. Terrified, she immediately tried to call Juan. The guard who answered told her Juan was busy and couldn't come to the phone and that the news was full of lies. He urged her not to worry and to wait for Juan at home, but her instincts screamed that the guard was lying. She hung up, got into her car, and broke down in tears. Even without knowing the full story, she knew something terrible had happened. Ignoring all advice, she drove straight to the prison. Inside the prison, Malamadra and his men had just finished enjoying a feast sent by the government. As Malamadra got up from his seat, he couldn't help but glance at the walkie-talkie he had used for negotiations. One of Malamadra's men caught this subtle moment. Later, Juan found a chance to steal the walkie-talkie and sneaked into an empty cell. Most inmates were distracted by the news on TV. Reports showed that Malamadra's uprising had sparked unrest in other prisons as well. Many prisoners across the country were now demanding fair treatment. Seizing the opportunity, Juan contacted the negotiator. He reported that the 3 hostages were currently in cell 219, but he warned they were being moved from cell to cell periodically. When Juan asked what the government planned to do next, the negotiator simply replied, "No comment." He added that the government had rejected Malamadra's demands to prevent inspiring further riots. Juan felt a wave of despair. Without negotiations, he knew he was as good as dead. The government only cared about the hostages, not about him. Meanwhile, Malamadra had already ordered his men to search for the missing walkie-talkie. After a thorough search, they found nothing. Juan casually returned and handed it over, claiming Malamadra had left it on the table. Watching this, Malamadra's enforcer grew even more suspicious. He immediately called the records office to investigate Juan's true identity. On the outside, officials discovered that it was the prison warden who had accidentally leaked the presence of special prisoners during a casual haircut. That careless conversation had triggered everything. Outside the prison, the families of inmates had gathered, including Juan's wife. She had hoped to check on Juan, but since it was his first day and few guards knew him, no one recognized her. With so many relatives crowded around, she blended in easily. Soon, word spread that an ambulance had arrived, and the crowd surged forward to see who was injured. The situation quickly spiraled into a violent clash. Inside, the prisoners watched the chaotic TV footage and exploded in rage. Not only were they suffering, now their families were being attacked too. As tensions escalated, the prison warden himself suited up for the crackdown. In the chaos, Juan's pregnant wife was shoved hard, causing her intense abdominal pain. Juan, peeking through a crack, saw it happen. Without thinking, he grabbed the walkie-talkie from Malamadra and begged them to save his wife. The negotiator immediately ordered the counter-terror squad to stop the assault and cut the live feed. Soon, the TVs inside the prison turned to static. The special forces outside also began pulling back. Only a handful of guards, led by the warden, continued using excessive force. Amid the pushing and shoving, Juan's wife couldn't escape. She was struck by a baton, knocked to the ground, and beaten unconscious. Later, Malamadra demanded a list of casualties within 30 minutes and insisted they locate Juan's wife. The negotiator tried to pacify him, saying she had been sent to the hospital and offering to arrange a visit, but Malamadra refused outright. He said, "Juan's wife isn't the only injured family member. If Juan leaves, what about everyone else?" For the sake of fairness, Malamadra wouldn't agree. Juan could only stay inside and wait anxiously. Just then, a prisoner who had secretly been investigating Juan walked in. It was obvious he had found out that Juan was actually a prison guard, but he didn't plan to tell Malamadra directly. Instead, he wanted to use the secret to blackmail Juan for benefits. Unfortunately for him, Juan wasn't afraid at all. Before anything had happened, the guards had already warned Juan that this guy was actually an informant for the guards. So now, it was simple: either both of them would get exposed and killed, or they kept each other's secrets and stayed alive. The prisoner had no choice but to back down. As time passed without any news of his wife, Juan grew more restless and agitated. Seeing this, Malamadra comforted him, telling him that everything that happened today would be blamed on himself. This way, Juan wouldn't get extra prison time. When he eventually got out, his child would only be around 7 or 8 years old. Those words touched Juan's heart deeply. Soon, Malamadra's men brought in the injury report from outside. The report only listed 4 injured people. One glance, and Malamadra knew it was a joke. Clearly, the government didn't take them seriously at all. Furious, Malamadra dragged a hostage out, ready to kill. Juan rushed forward to stop him. Seeing that he couldn't calm them down, Juan suggested they cut off an ear instead. This way, they could send a message without taking a life. Hearing this, Malamadra's men exploded with anger. Every time, Juan came up with excuses to stop them. Fine, they said, if Juan wanted an ear, then Juan should be the one to cut it. If he didn't have the guts, then he would be the one to die. For a guard who still had some sense of justice left, this was torture beyond words. But the atmosphere had already reached a boiling point. Juan had no choice but to do it. Soon, The counter-terror commander received a severed ear as proof. Meanwhile, Juan scrubbed his hands like crazy. He knew that his mentality had changed. He was no longer the same man who walked into this prison. Someone came to find him, saying that Malamadra was looking for him. Nervously, Juan approached the group, thinking his identity had finally been exposed, but instead, the informant had obtained a video recording of the crackdown outside. After reviewing it carefully, Juan finally saw it clearly. The man who had beaten his wife nearly to death was none other than the prison warden. Furious, Juan demanded that the warden be brought back for negotiation. Originally, the warden had already been dismissed for his brutal actions, but before he could even leave the prison, he was summoned back inside. The warden arrived alone, still wearing an arrogant smirk. He thought Malamadra would at least show him some respect, but the moment he stepped in, Malamadra pulled out a knife. They avoided the cameras and headed down to the basement level. Pushing through the crowd, Malamadra dragged the warden in front of Juan, boiling with rage. Juan didn't give him a chance to speak. He punched the warden hard. Malamadra pulled Juan back and calmly asked the warden, "How is Juan's wife? How bad are her injuries?" The warden claimed he truly didn't know the situation at the hospital. Malamadra handed the walkie-talkie to Juan. He told him, "Ask them yourself," and he made it clear, if they refused to let Juan speak to his wife, the warden would die on the spot. Facing Juan's questions, the warden couldn't give a straight answer. The hospital had just confirmed the devastating news. Juan's wife and unborn child could not be saved. Seeing Juan slowly collapse in grief, Malamadra said nothing. He walked over, pulled Juan into a hug, and silently signaled to his men. The prisoners immediately rushed forward and started beating the warden mercilessly. On the verge of death, desperate to save himself, the warden screamed out that Juan was actually a prison guard. Of course, Juan heard everything clearly. Watching the old man frantically shouting, Juan paused for a few seconds. Then he turned around, sprinted toward the warden, grabbed the shard of tile he had used earlier, and in a flash, ended the warden's life through massive blood loss. Now that his wife and child were dead, and his hands were stained with blood, Juan no longer had any reason to live. He tried to hang himself using a belt, but the belt snapped under his weight. In the end, life gave him one more unwanted chance. Meanwhile, Malamadra's men kept whispering that Juan might really have been a guard all along, but Malamadra remained unmoved. Whether Juan was a guard or not didn't matter anymore. In his heart, Juan was already his brother. Soon, the government sent in a new negotiator. This man represented the president himself, hoping to resolve the situation quickly. But Juan, who hadn't died, dragged the warden's corpse out in public. He openly admitted to killing him. He warned that if the government didn't meet their previous demands, the 3 hostages would die the same way. Juan was no longer the man he used to be. He had seen through the hypocrisy of the politicians. This time, he demanded that within 1 hour, the Prime Minister must appear on national television to announce sweeping reforms of the prison system. If the Prime Minister didn't appear within the hour, they would go to war. The negotiator was terrified by Juan's new demeanor. As for Malamadra, he remained silent. Even though Juan had stolen the spotlight, Malamadra knew deep down, Juan had become just like him. After the negotiator left with their demands, Malamadra was called outside through the walkie-talkie. The prison officials tossed down a file. It was Juan's guard employment record. Staring at the document, Malamadra immediately declared it a fake, but the guards tried to lure him with promises. "If you help us, maybe you'll be released in a year," they said. Maybe even sooner. They offered Malamadra enough incentives to betray Juan, but they completely misjudged him. Malamadra had already accepted the truth about Juan's identity, and he didn't care. Compared to the treacherous government, Juan was the one he could trust. Malamadra quietly pulled out his knife. He told Juan, "The guards want me to kill you, but I'll wait until all this is over before deciding anything." Malamadra didn't regret making Juan his brother, though he said they would settle things afterward. In his heart, Malamadra had already accepted him completely. Soon, other prisoners called them outside. Everyone was staring at the television, waiting for the Prime Minister's speech. At that very moment, the informant quietly made his move upstairs. Without hesitation, he killed several guards who were watching over the hostages. Then he and his crew armed themselves, waiting for the special forces to attack. Suddenly, smoke grenades were thrown through the windows. It was clear they had been tricked again. Seeing the chaos, Juan suggested they kill the hostages immediately. He and Malamadra charged upstairs, ready to fight, but halfway up, Juan was ambushed. The homemade weapon at close range nearly tore through him completely. Seeing Juan wounded, Malamadra's heart shattered. He tried to comfort Juan, but soon he too was shot. Despite the pain, Malamadra forced himself to stand, but after a few staggering steps, he collapsed again. An explosion rang out overhead, and special forces descended from the ceiling. The hostages, protected by the informant's crew, were quickly secured. The remaining prisoners stood no chance. One by one, they surrendered. When the guards checked the bodies, they found one among them. He was dead. Surprisingly, Malamadra was still alive. Carried away on a stretcher, Malamadra calmly stared at the prison officials. In his heart, he was already plotting his next move. And with that, the movie comes to an end. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.